Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast. There are times when the only way to help make the environment of an organization safer psychologically is to report what's going on. That process can be challenging when it's done internally. We'll talk about a system that's been created to help handle these reports from outside the organization. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to minimize harm and reduce vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So the concept of reporting misconduct can be quite challenging for a variety of factors. Fear of retaliation. Whistleblowers often worry about losing their jobs, facing demotion, or experiencing harassment from colleagues or supervisors. Isolation. Speaking out against wrongdoing can lead to social isolation within the workplace, as peers may distance themselves and avoid association with the person called the whistleblower. Psychological stress. The process of whistleblowing can be emotionally draining, causing anxiety, stress, and mental health issues. Lack of protection. So, not all organizations have a strong legal protection for reporters of misconduct, making it kind of risky. And doubt about the impact. Those who report may fear that their efforts will not lead to meaningful change or that their concerns will be ignored or dismissed. This episode, we're going to talk about a system that's been created that allows this process to be managed outside of the organization. And sometimes that's probably better. Even in great organizations, it's sometimes better to have this separate so it creates a level of trust that is sometimes lacking inside the organization itself. So for this conversation, I'm reconnecting with someone I met at a conference almost a year ago, not quite. And we're going to get right into it with an introduction of my guest by my guest with this question. So, who is Juliette Gust?
Thank you, David, and thanks for having me here. I am the co-founder of Ethics Suite, and as you said, we provide a whistleblower hotline solution. We opted almost 8 years ago now to make it one that doesn't require an operator for some of the reasons that you just listed. People don't feel comfortable talking on the phone anymore. They feel their voice might be recognized. Someone might be listening to the recording, or whoever picks up the phone in many cases is someone that's known to the reporter. And so having this kind of digital solution where people can report online, it removes that fear away. And then again, having a third party do that also removes that fear, because we don't capture IP addresses. We certainly wouldn't, if we did, wouldn't send that to the organization. um, People feel comfortable at times giving us their contact information, but we assure them that we won't give it to their employer unless they ask us to do that. And so that's kind of a brief summary of our hotline solution. And then besides that, I'm a forensic accountant, a fraud examiner, and a auditor for almost 20 years now. And so I've dedicated most of my career to investigating issues that people bring up, not only with regards to fraud, but also misconduct in general, right? There's harassment, there's other employee relations issue, bullying, discrimination, all of those issues that really should be investigated. And I like to use the term organizational justice because that's what people expect. And sometimes a third party or an impartial, independent party is well suited for that kind of role, because people are a little bit more comfortable that whoever's addressing their concern isn't falling on one side or another.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into some of those issues a bit. But before we do, another question that I ask everyone who comes on is, what does psychological health and safety mean to you?
You know, I think there are different areas where that comes into play. So if I look at it from a workplace perspective, which is what we're discussing here, it's not dreading Monday morning or whenever your next work day is, not, having a stomach ache when it's time to go to work, or feeling anxious or miserable. To me, it's not walking on eggshells around certain coworkers. It's also not feeling excluded from meetings or feeling like you can't participate in meetings. And I think that really almost everyone can understand that feeling. I know I've been there. I used to work for a big four organization, very tough environment, especially when you're investigating fraud and corruption. They're always highly charged and intense exchanges. But, I've been told to just shut up and keep my head down and do work in a group of people, or raise my voice to say something and been completely ignored by, a table full of people. So I certainly understand that feeling. And that is, to me, the psychological safety of being comfortable at work, being able to do what you do best freely, without feeling that if you voice your opinion or your concerns, that you'll be retaliated against, as you mentioned earlier. And that's not always losing your job. Retaliated against could be, as I said, excluded, ostracized.
Yeah, I'm yes, 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 and yes. I think there's sometimes a belief that the only kinds of retaliation that matters is something really severe. Again, typically people losing their job or being demoted, or something that really hits people in the pocket. And I can make the argument that sometimes the more low level types of retaliation are even worse, because you're still in the job, but all of a sudden the meetings are happening, you're not invited, or you participate and it turns out to be what I call pseudo participative, that the decisions are already made by everybody else in the room, and you show up thinking that it's actually going to be a discussion, and the decisions are already made. Or the whispering around a water cooler or whatever. And all of these, actually, those types of situations meet the definition of psychosocial hazard exposure. It's something that I perceive is threatening to me. That doesn't feel good when people exclude me. It doesn't feel good when I have a position and my the person I report to goes to the people who report to me and leave me out of it altogether. And often, or I should say I won't say, maybe I don't have the data to say often, but there are occasions when the reason that happens is you're in on the crooked stuff and so are you, and I'm the person who's actually trying to do this correctly, and I gotta get basically punished for doing the job the way I thought it was supposed to be done. I really relate to this because I have a bit of a work history myself of being that guy who, these were the rules, this is the way we were supposed to do it. And sometimes you look around and you go like, well, why am I the only person doing it? what maybe we should change the rule, but we said we were going to do this thing, and now we're doing that, and that seems kind of strange. So, before I get too far off down that rabbit trail, uh, what got you interested in fraud investigation and that type of thing?
I think mostly because it happened to me. So, I found it fascinating, the investigation of it. So before, my last life, initially my career was gonna be in hospitality, and so I went to hospitality school. I went to college for hospitality. I went even abroad to Switzerland to study at a hotel school, and I worked in the industry for about 20 years since I was 12 years old. And I loved it. It was great. But I did find as I moved up into management and leadership that I had a lot of employee relations issues, of course, big labor intensive in that industry. So employee relations issues that needed to be investigated and addressed and resolved. And then theft meant a lot of theft issues and some fraud issues. And so I found over time that I thought I lacked skills in accounting and finance, and addressing some of those issues. And I decided I'll go back to school for an accounting degree and shore up my hospitality work with it. But once I was there, actually, my hospitality accounting professor said, "You're pretty good at this. You should look at forensic accounting." And so I did that. Ended up staying for another degree, with the support of my professors, and then went to work, as I said, for a big four firm. Really kind of launched into this other career, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But it was always fascinating to me as a manager to be able to find out why things were going wrong. Like a puzzle. Why am I losing money, or why is the inventory missing? So that was the
Wow,
launch pad.
it sounds like, almost like one of those crime shows, like a whodunit type of deal, you know. And for those of you who enjoy puzzles, I find puzzles tedious. Uh, I guess it's probably a, I don't think it's ADD, but I just, sitting down to a puzzle, it's like, well, let's cut to the chase. But I think it's important that we have organizations with people who can do a little bit of both, because too much of either could be an issue. Too much of this blue sky, oh, I'm not really interested in the details. That's sometimes how you end up with folks involved in, fraudulent behavior on the one hand. But on the other side, sometimes folks who are so down into the details all the time, they can't raise their head up to see the bigger picture. And both are important. So, if somebody was asking for your advice or direction. So, what does effective ethics and fraud investigation even look like? I mean, what are some of the the things that should be in place if that system is going to be effective?
Well, initially, I think the very first thing that has to come into place is the culture, right? That tone at the top, or so it's called, is that there is a culture where you're encouraged to speak up, speak your mind, speak about concerns. You don't necessarily have to be anonymous to do it. And I've seen many organizations where people are very comfortable. Um, Going to HR, going to the legal department, even going to their CEO and saying, I think there's an issue here, a concern there. And there's no problem with that. But there's others, especially when it comes to very sensitive issues like sexual harassment or like abuse of some sort or corruption, where an anonymous channel really helps. So having all of those mechanisms in place to me is ideal, right? You have an open door policy that really is open door, and people welcome your concerns without retaliating against you, as we mentioned. The other is having the mechanisms in place for reporting both named and anonymous. And then the third is really the most important part. It's the response to that. So, for example, if someone does choose to report anonymously, 9 times out of 10, when I have to tell this to leadership, the first question they ask is guess. Who is it? And I always tell them wrong. That's really not the first question. Unless for some reason it really matters who that person is, which in my experience is not often, because they've voiced a concern. So the concern is the issue, not the person who voiced it, and even not their motivation for voicing it. There are people who are angry. Um, Maybe they just got fired, or maybe they had an argument with their boss, but it doesn't make what they're saying any less truthful. They've just maybe put that in their back pocket for a rainy day. Not a great motivation for reporting, but still doesn't negate the fact that they've reported something that might be happening. And so that's what needs to be investigated. So I try to teach them, why do I even need to tell you? Let's just call them the reporter. And I've been fortunate in much of my experience before starting my own business to work for people that understood that and respected it. And so I think every organization should implement that. Let's just call them the reporter or whatever other thing you want to call them, but there's no need to banter their name around. Um, these are some of the issues I see with HR departments that aren't appropriately trained. In some cases, ethics and compliance departments that aren't appropriately trained is they share way too much information that's needed. I have an allegation. I need to investigate that allegation. Period. Doesn't matter who reported it. So that's kind of one factor in the effective investigations. And then the second is that impartiality is what do I need to investigate? And it's not driven by my view of the reporter or my view of the issue. Maybe I agree with it, maybe I don't agree with it. But that's another big part of training too, is that both conscious and unconscious bias of the investigator. I don't believe these person. I think they're a jerk, and it happens. But again, doesn't make what they're saying less truthful. So making sure you address that impartiality is important. And there may be people within the organization that can be impartial, but sometimes it might be necessary to go outside of the organization to find somebody, not only so that the people being investigated and the people around the witnesses feel comfortable discussing it with a third party, but also if that was ever to go to litigation, for example, it doesn't appear self-serving, right? You had an independent party conduct that investigation. And so I think the results are always looked upon a little bit more favorably. If that makes sense. And then finally, the remediation. So after the investigation is done, all the details have been collected, whether there's evidence of that the allegation is correct or incorrect, you have to do something about it. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short because they play favorites. So maybe it's, well, this salesperson committed fraud or whatever the case might be. We don't use that word, right? We wait for that to be adjudicated, but maybe they violated certain policies around fraud. Um, but they're really good salespeople and they bring in a lot of money. So, you know what? We're going to give them a second chance. But another person that doesn't have that kind of reputation is fired. So the people notice that, right? They notice consistency, they notice proportionate um, discipline for whatever action. And so it's really important to make sure that those issues are addressed. As I said before, with a keen eye on the organizational justice, because people watch and they listen and they talk.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, there seem to be a lot of connections between, the things you're describing and uh, at least my view around health and safety in general, because I've had that same situation. So I'll go to, leadership, manager, however they describe themselves, and suggest that. So we have this thing that, this problem that workers are having. They don't feel that their harnesses fit correctly. Then the question is, well, who was it? Well, that's not really the issue. The issue about that's not the point. The issue is we have an inadequate system to ensure that fall protection is properly measured for the person who's going to use it. And it doesn't matter what their motivation was, because if the issue's not there, nobody can report it. You can't report something that, well, you could create it, but you're not going to have an issue if it doesn't exist. And I also heard this recently around this entire concept around, psychological health and safety in general, is when an environment feels toxic to people, feels unsafe to people, feels, doesn't feel just to people. There's, you know, what some people do is get by. What other people do is get out. And what other people do is get even. and, but that's at that point, that's not even really the issue. What's the sort? Why is it that they felt that they needed to behave in that way? Just like if we, well, again, we miss it on physical kinds of hazards. Well, the person, slipped and, broke their ankle. Well, why weren't they walking? No, why was the floor wet? What is it that we're doing that's going to keep the floor wet or keep the surface that they're walking on slippery? I mean, so the fact that this person fell, of course, we want to give them treatment. But again, it's to your point. I think we focus too much on the reporter and not on the reported. The thing that's what has to be fixed. And the other thing I'll say, and off to another question, is the problems tend not to be the people. It tends to be the systems that the people are in anyway. I mean, you hired that person. So if they're all of this, that's somebody that you hired, you promoted, they've been around for 2 days or 20 years. but that was a decision that the organization made. How do we, you know, fix the environment such that that person can do the thing that they're actually good at?
That's very true, and I find in unfortunately more cases than not that the reason for certain issues are because people's issues were not already addressed. Everybody knew. So either it was a hire that wasn't appropriately background checked or was appropriately background checked, but no one read the results. Or it could be people that have had already employee relations issues with other employees or in other roles, but no one wanted to address it because they were uncomfortable and they just kept moving this person along and maybe promoting them, or maybe they were friendly with somebody. And it's only when things blow up, it doesn't have to get to that point, but it is only when things blow up that something gets addressed.
Right, right. So have you seen or can you think of circumstances, either with yourself or with others, where these um, these situations have created kind of emotional impacts on people?
Yes, sadly, but especially when they're not addressed, as I was mentioning. So, like you said, people leave or they get even or they do nothing. So you can see the ones that do nothing, they're not reporting anything, right? Or someone might report something and say there were 10 witnesses, but you didn't hear from those 10 witnesses. Um, a lot of people leave. A lot of people just say, you know what, no one's going to do anything. And frankly, the two most quoted concerns about reporting anything are, one, I'm afraid of retaliation, but two, no one's going to do anything anyway. That's always a close response to the first one. So um, addressing the issues is really what helps these problems get resolved and addressing them appropriately. So I find, like I said before, most people like the head in the sand approach. Is I'll just wait till something goes wrong. And I've seen that when I'm trying to persuade someone about the benefits of having an employee hotline of some sort, or ethics line or helpline, whatever they want to call it. I've had people tell me, I don't care. I don't want to know what their problem is. If they don't like it, they can just find another job. And that is indicative of the issues that we have. And I try to tell them it doesn't matter if you don't care, you're still responsible as their employer for making sure certain things are in place. I'll wait till it happens.
Oh, oh, yeah. Yeah, and there's a part of me with people because again, there is. I guess I hear less that people don't care about safety. People won't say that with their mouth. They'll say it with their actions. Oh yeah, everybody. I mean, I can't say I've ever been to an organization. Yeah, safety's our number one priority until it comes down to doing something about it. I was with a I was with an organization once where they they had a stipend that they gave for work shoes. It was a couple $100 a year or whatever it was, and I had workers coming to me who were wearing their shoes out within months, and they were doing that because of the work that they were doing. They were doing road work, on hot asphalt and all that type of thing, and it was they would go through shoes in 3, 4, 5 months, and they'd come back and say, Miss Daniels, I think I need a new pair of shoes, and they'd show me their shoes, and they were like holes in the sole, so I go buy them another pair. And when I got back from some of the folks in management, well, that cost a lot of money. I go, well, the foot injury is going to cost you a lot more. And frankly, I personally don't particularly care what it costs. That's not my job to worry about what it costs. That's your job to care what it costs. You expose them to the hazard. And because you're a private sector employer with more than 10 employees, OSHA says, and they would say to others, but you have to do something about this. It's a recognizable hazard. And and again, you caring about it or not really personally is an issue. I'm not, I don't have an issue with you either, but my job is to tell you that this needs to be taken care of. And if I have the power to do it, to do something about it. That's it. And if you don't want that, that's fine. Find yourself somebody else. Eventually, they kind of did. They made it such I didn't want to stay there anyway. But that's okay. I mean, that's okay. And that leads me to a question. In your time as an investigator, um, I would suspect that there are times that the unethical, fraudulent behavior is the person at the top or somebody really close to the top. Have you found situations where investigating people at the top becomes an issue for the investigator?
It is difficult, and it depends on who engaged me to do the work. So, for example, If it's the board of directors, then, I've got a lot of support behind me to push and to look for, maybe I need documents, maybe I need interviews, I need people to tell me things. So that helps to have the support of the board. Maybe if it's a general counsel that engaged me, I might have some of that support, which would help. But if often I'm engaged to do something that has no one expected that someone further up was involved. And that's when it really gets difficult. And I think discretion is important. It's trying to gather information without tipping off that leader that maybe things were said about them, and then trying to contact the board of directors and getting an audience and say, hey, look, this is what I found. This is bigger than you expected, and I know that's unfortunate, but you really need to investigate it. And most of the time they are open to that. Some of the time they're not. I've had unfortunately clients who will say, um, put your pencils down and go away, you're done. And maybe they addressed that internally after I left, but they certainly didn't want me investigated, and that's happened, not just one time, but several. It's uncomfortable, right? Because a lot of people think, well, if I make public that a leader of this organization was involved in fraud or theft or misconduct, then it's public and we might have some reputational damage. And so that's why I always say these internal hotlines are fantastic to me. I've worked with them now, like I said, for almost 20 years because it's an early warning system. And isn't it better to address it internally? It might be a little embarrassing at the moment internally, but it's still internal. Fix the issue before it gets on. I've seen harassment allegations made on Facebook, right? And I remember in one time in particular, by the time the owner of that establishment realized that it was on Facebook, it had been shared more than 600 times. This isn't just I think it was under an hour. It had been shared that many times. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of the explosive articles about harassment in the hospitality industry, and so that was one of them. But that is important to address it before it gets public, because then even if it does get public, it's not like that. It's the cover up, not the crime situation. If you did the right thing all along, I think people look upon that a lot more favorably. Wow, you found out that your CEO was embezzling, but you pulled in an investigator, you did an investigation, you fired them, whatever the case might be. And now that we found out, there's no uproar because you already did everything you were supposed to do. You weren't just trying to hide it.
Right, right. Yeah, oh boy. Yeah,
It's the
that's
same from a safety perspective. We have a
it is.
sister product that is safety incident reporting. And so it's very similar, but it has different fields, right? Because you might want to track different things, insurance claims, or look for patterns and hazards that should be addressed before it happens again. And so, we say the same thing. If you have these reports coming in telling you that there's a problem or something already happened, you can't take it just as in a vacuum because it might happen to 50 other people. So address each issue as they come in and document what you did about it so that if it does get worse for whatever point, you can demonstrate that you cared and you're taking steps to remedy.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, so again, the definition of a psychosocial hazard is some factor in work that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as threatening to them to the extent that it affects their behavior. And it is a very different kind of look at hazards in general, because generally a chemical will do the same thing to any human being that comes into contact with it. But a psychosocial hazard is just different. I felt it was an issue. You may not have felt it's an issue. But I believe, and I believe this to the core of my being, that the extent to which organizations will pay attention to what might seem like a small issue to me, but it's not a small issue to the person who reported it. And I also think this is an opportunity to build trust, because if you won't pay attention to the small things, you probably won't pay attention to the big one either. So I'm not going to tell you. But if I know you're going to pay attention, now I'm not saying that you're going to quote unquote solve all of them or make everything different, because there are some things about just interacting with other human beings that are stressful. They just are. But at least I know that. I can expect that. I know. And if I know you're going to pay attention to it and do your level best to make it as less threatening as possible, or to protect me from it. So if you're going to put me in a call center, people are going to yell at me. You know that. People are going to call. They aren't going to like what happened. But what do you do when I tell you that was a little bit too much? How do you? And again, back to the point that you made. How do you react to the report? What do you do about it? Because ultimately, I honestly think that's really what matters. I mean, it matters what you do, but not what you say about it. It matters what you do about it. I heard once that your actions speak so loud, I can't hear a word that you're saying. So you may say that, oh, we don't, we have a zero tolerance for harassment and bullying. And yeah, until it happens to someone and they report it. Then the question is, what do you do? What do you do? So for particularly for those organizations, what are some things that can be done? And I want to, I'm talking about the systems where there is the internal investigator, and this may be, this sounds like a role you may have been in before. I think investigators, safety professionals, even HR people, folks who are kind of responsible for these kinds of systems, they get a lot of pressure placed on them. I didn't commit the fraud. I didn't do that. I just reported it. And particularly when there's kind of this incompatibility, I know I've been brought in to do safety investigations and serve in safety roles when the company knew good and well that there was a problem before I got there, and really wanted to use me as a scapegoat, to be quite honest, because they weren't really. So what are some, some things you can share for the investigator in terms of keeping themselves from being burnt out, stressed out, having their own kinds of emotional challenges, either from your own experience or from the experience of others?
That's a really good question because it is a tough job. I think the people that take it very personally struggle a little bit more, or I consider it a little bit of ego because some people approach an interview or approach an investigation thinking that they know a lot and they know what happened, and they share that with their interviewees. For example, they talk over them, and so trying to teach them is that just let them talk. This is what you want, right? You want them to have the audience. You want them to tell you things. So it doesn't matter if you look dumb. That is a very effective tactic to me. Just I really don't know what your job is like. Maybe you can share with me what you're supposed to do. And I apologize if I ask stupid questions. And people are comfortable, they think, oh, I've got this all day. I'm gonna snow this person. But really you've done your homework already and you know all the right answers. So you can start gauging, if they're being truthful. You can also set them up a little bit. Like if I ask you what the process is supposed to be, but I already know that you didn't do that process. Well, after you tell me exactly what you're supposed to do, then I'm going to ask you, why didn't you do it? But they might not know that I know that already, right? So those are the things that I think are a little bit of fun to me, but it takes a little bit of training on forgetting about your ego, not taking things personally. I find uh, it sounds kind of silly, but things that you do outside help a lot. Like I just spoke recently to someone about who is a teacher in stress management. And she asked me, based on the work that you do, what do you do for stress? And I said, I dance, I tap dance, or I jazz dance. And it's a lot of fun. And I can't think about anything but, 5, 6, 7, 8 for that hour or 3 hours or whatever I'm dancing. That's all is in my head, 5, 6, 7, 8. So she said, ideally that moving to music is one of the best things. And that somehow you've managed to find that right brain, left brain, where the analytical part investigating fraud with the creative part of dancing, that really helps reduce stress. So for me, my whole life, that's been my go-to when I'm very stressed out. Just take a class, or maybe it's fitness. It also helps to feel in control. So you never know when someone might get angry with you when you're interviewing them. They might jump up, they might yell at you, they might try to hit you. It's not common, I think, in a corporate atmosphere, but it could happen. So I think feeling strong and ready for those situations also helps ground you and understand that these things can happen. And usually staying unemotional is the best response that I can give. So I have people say, I don't know how you can stay so calm throughout, but that's because I'm not taking it personally and because I'm not trying to look smart and because I'm probably tired because I went to dance class the night before. So all those things help.
Right, right. Yeah. So, I would it be correct to suggest that your investigation skills and those that police officers and law enforcement folks use are very similar?
I think so. I think that I've learned so much from law enforcement with regard to interviews, but they have a little bit more leverage than the corporate investigator. So that's why I think we have to be very careful to be nice, to be persuasive, to be trustworthy, to establish that rapport because we don't have the stick of, look, I can subpoena your bank accounts. I can't do that. I can put you in jail. I can't do that, right? I have to sit there and say, hey, the door's open. You can leave whenever you like. And I'm just going to ask you some questions. And if they don't like the questions I ask, they can walk out if they want to. And I don't have access to any of their personal information so that I can confirm or not confirm, that they got a kickback into bank account A. So law enforcement, like I said, they have a little bit more leverage, but I think they have to employ some of the same tactics of establishing rapport to be able to get information. And I learned that it's funny. I learned that early on because I used to think I have to be a really good forensic accountant to figure anything out. And I was on one of my first investigations. I was in Mexico for like 9 months. It was $104 million financial statement fraud. And I was there for months going through all kinds of records, frustrated, but asking questions, asking questions. And then I think it was maybe 6 months in that I said to the controller at the time who was withholding information, I said, you know what? I'd really like to go home. And I'm sure that you want me to go home and not be here anymore. So if you just tell me what happened, we'll be done. And I don't have to do this every day digging through all of your documents. And he did. He just shared a whole bunch of stuff. And so that taught me really early, you know what? The interview is really key. It's not just the details, like you mentioned before. It's not just the piece by piece puzzle. It's the overall picture. And more importantly, it's having somebody give you some clues right off the bat. So I usually start every investigation off with interviews, every audit off with interviews. I used to do anti-corruption audits, and the interviews can change the trajectory of what you're doing based on what you hear. So you can't really presuppose what it is you're going to investigate. You might have a theory, but it's very helpful to either have statements that cement that theory, support it, or the ones that just send you in a completely different direction, which happens very often. Yeah, I always joke that I thought, especially with employee relations issues, I thought before this interview, I had a certain mindset, and now after this interview, oh no, now I have to look over here, and you just keep going like a pinball.
Right, right. So tell me how these digital systems are different than the ones that rely primarily on human beings.
I mentioned a little bit earlier about the safety or the expectation that if, for example, some organizations have a phone number for a hotline that goes to their HR department, or maybe it goes to their legal department. And so maybe somebody's going to pick up the phone that recognizes me, or maybe they're going to record what I say. Or if I leave a voicemail, because a lot of them have voicemails, well, someone's going to listen to that and recognize my voice and know that it's me reporting it. If they're naming themselves, that's not really an issue, but it depends how much trust they have in those departments. Others have third parties with the hotline number, but that's the same thing, that people still aren't sure. I don't know who this third party is. Maybe I don't even recognize that it's a third party because of the way it's branded, like the company. I have, a letter from the CEO on the reporting site telling me the number, or the number is in my code of conduct, and I don't really believe that it goes to a third party. So similar issues there. But the other is just time. Maybe I have to wait on hold for 10 minutes before I get an operator on the line. And then maybe the operator, because I think they're wonderful people, but their jobs aren't as investigators, right? Their jobs are to transcribe. And so, they're really just writing down what you say, and that might be an uncomfortable process for people. Or maybe they're, well, how do you spell Bailey? and it just becomes tedious to do that. So I think that making it as easy as possible for a reporter is really what we wanted to do from the beginning, because we were investigators and we are investigators, so we're practitioners as well, not technologists. So we tried to set things up to say what deters reporters, right? I want to make a form short. I don't want them to have to talk to a person. I want them to be able to do it 24/7, from their phone if they want to. So I think that's what helps a lot. I think the voice, people just don't. Right, they just don't use the phone so much anymore, and it depends on the organization, because there's some that have to have a phone because of where they're based. Um, I've seen organizations with, let's say, maybe mining or oil and gas. They're kind of in far-flung places. They don't have Wi-Fi. They have to use a telephone or a satellite telephone, and that's okay. Not for everybody.
Wow. And so again, this a person is able to call and have a kind of a digital interaction with the system that collects your information. I assume that's how it works.
Yeah, a very short form, fill it out. Where are you, what are you reporting about? Who are you reporting about? What's the issue you're reporting about? Do you want to be named or anonymous? Is it still happening? Go on, just a short list of questions that can help the investigator. And, we have a feature where the reporter can still connect with you by a chat feature. And so as an investigator, I can ask them questions, they can answer questions. And most of the time, I would say 8 out of 10 times, after a couple of those interactions, people are comfortable and they reveal themselves. Okay, I understand that you're investigating, you're taking my report seriously, you're assuring me that my identity for now will be, will remain anonymous. And so I'll just talk to you on the phone or meet you in person. And we have some people that they're very uncomfortable meeting in person, of course, where they are employed. So, we might meet them at a coffee shop, or we might meet them, in a conference room at a hotel, depending. So that's always something that can be arranged. And as people see that you're making those efforts to make them comfortable, they reveal themselves and are a lot more cooperative. And in some cases, you don't even need them to do that. With the information that they gave you, you can just conduct the investigation without involving them at all.
Right. Right. Yeah. Some are they're pretty black and white. Yeah, that's bad. we need to figure out what's going on with that. Yeah. 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 I mean, a thread that I hear interwoven into what you're describing is or a concept maybe is just the concept of trust. That trust is really it's actually one of my favorite books is called The Speed of Trust. And it's just so important that people be able to to trust, and trust is about character and competence. Are you the type of person that will do what you say, that your words your bond, that type of thing? And do you know what you're doing? I mean, do you actually, is this person actually good at this stuff? And the extent to which both of those are high, you just get more trust. And sometimes, I think because of the pain, hurt, and trauma that people have already been exposed to, they go into every interaction that's related to work with that kind of hesitancy, because every time I turn around, something's happening. I'm having to protect myself all the time. It's like, like I have to play defense all the time until those defenses drop, until they figure out that no, you don't have to do that here. This is a place. This is a safe place and space for you to share what's going on, and something will be done. I mean, if nothing else, then you're able to get this stuff out, because carrying around the knowledge that things have gone on can be stressful in and of itself. At least I believe they can. And I think there's even some physical ailments that people and organizations have because they're keeping a secret. They
Yes, and that's extremely uncomfortable. We talk to people that tell us something that their supervisor was doing, or whatever, someone in leadership, and they said, I've known they've been doing this for so long, but who am I going to tell? It's crushing for them until that moment comes. And a lot of times it's not them who revealed it; it's found out another way. But then you're interviewing them as part of the issue, and they break down. Oh, I knew it, and I'm so glad you're here, and someone is addressing this because it's terrible. I haven't known what to do. And I think that people don't give enough thought to how hard it is to come forward. I mean, it's really a difficult decision that people make. And so a lot of whistleblowers are dismissed. for many reasons, but I think it's worth taking a second to think, you know, how hard it must have been for them to decide that they were going to do this. They must have thought about it for weeks. Maybe they confided in a loved one and were encouraged to do that, but they're going to be nervous about it every single day until the issue is addressed. And even then, they might still be a little nervous about it after. So I think given that respect goes a long way in addressing the issues.
Yeah, obviously, as we start to wrap up here, I'm really on this journey, cause celeb, whatever, however people want to describe it, to convince people that this is a safety issue for people. It is. It is a safe, and some of it tends not to get addressed until it shows up physically. But why do we wait? Why do we wait until the person, they're starting to lose their hair and have chest pains at work and take time off with, all kinds of ailments because something's going on, and it's not just them. Why is it that that group over there, we can't even get everybody to show up for work all the time? They seem to be producing the work, but there's something going on. These are safety issues for people. And when we can focus on creating the environment, because the safety issue impacts the person, but it isn't the person, it is an environmental thing. There's something about our controls that is inadequate that allowed a person to be able to do that. I mean, that there's something missing there, that we need to be able to address. And so it does matter that's affected people. We need to do something about that. But fixing the environment and the system itself is really the most important issue. So, if what as a close, can you share, a little bit, folks want to learn more about the work that you all do. They want to find out more. They may be in a situation where they need, the kinds of services that you provide. Can you share a little bit more about, again, how people would reach out to you and some of the things that you could do if they did?
I could, and I want to follow up with something that you just said as well before I start, is that there's a quote that I love, is that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I think that if people see in their organizations, hey, this manager's just made a snarky remark at someone, or this other manager, whatever the case might be, and address it on the spot. Because if you don't, that's the environment that you're cultivating, right? That's the one that you accepted and the one that will continue because you didn't bother to address it. So I always find that very important. I see a lot of people walk past issues, literally and figuratively, that they could address on the spot and change. And if they don't do that, people notice. And now they don't only think, "Wow, I have to work in this environment," but I have to work in this environment and no one cares. That's a second kind of, to me, psychological factor that weighs it down even more. So I won't say anything because nobody's going to care anyway. So other than that, addressing, like, I like to tell our clients and prospective clients that our hotline is, it's a tool. The important thing is what comes after the report, right? It's what they do. So it's the culture that they cultivate. Do you encourage people to bring forth issues so that you can address them, or do you think of those issues brought up as just more work, which I've heard, right? People will say, "I don't want a hotline; it's just more work." But then, like you said, well, when it blows up, then there's a lot more work and a lot more cost to that. So take it as the early warning system, but then respond to it appropriately. Make sure that things are investigated. Make sure that they're appropriately disciplined. That good action is taken. Remediation is taken as needed. And then where we come in is really providing that mechanism. And then because we're practitioners, we actually are the only hotline that also offers the support for doing those investigations. So we can triage reports for our clients. Some of them are small and they feel like they might not appear impartial if they're the ones looking at the reports that come in. So we look at it for them. And if we find no issues, then we release it to them. Or maybe others want kind of a low level triage done. Like, I need you to tell me what the issue type is, who should investigate it, maybe give me a little um, guidance on how I should investigate it and then release it to me. And others say, I don't have the resources or the skills to investigate this issue. Can you just put a team together and investigate it for me? So, same thing with preventing things, right? We can help create programs to help prevent these issues, anti fraud programs, code of conduct training, all kinds of policy development to put those internal controls and processes in place as well. So, to reach us, we're at ethicsweek.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Our company's on LinkedIn, and we try to stay on there as often as possible and respond as soon as possible. And we stay, my business partner and I, she is a lawyer and I'm the accountant. So we really try to attack, the issues for our clients from all sides and respond to them ourselves. We don't have, like reps or people. We do it ourselves because we like the work, right? We still do the work. So thank you.
Wow. No, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Again, as I so often do, I've just learned a lot by listening and understanding a little bit about some of the work that you do. And it's the Lord's work. It's really so important because, we can, organizations can say they can say whatever they want about what they think they are. But we need systems to make sure. I mean, we need systems to make sure. And it's not about people's intent. I think there are a lot of people, they are actually trying to do what's right, but things happen. And it's not all, even some of the, I suspect that some of what actually turned out to be fraud wasn't intentional. It's that I just was so poorly trained. I just kept doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, but I'm not really supposed to do it. And nobody ever pointed it out, so but we do need systems. We need environments that support the things that we say we want, and it's good to see that there are systems such as the one that you've created and folks like you to help people get this stuff done. So thanks very much for the conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And we audit them too, because like you said, there are organizations who say, we care about you. And I tell them, look, I've looked through all of your policies, your code of conduct, all the government's documents, and I can't find your hotline. You keep saying in all of them, we want you to report. We want you to report, but you don't say where. So that's an interesting, and whenever I tell them, they say, well, because we're trying to not get junk reports. But you're not getting any at all.
You're not getting any at all. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Juliette, thanks very much. Thanks very much. So, if you're watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something you've heard will bring you back to a future episode. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to David at id2-solutions.com. Or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.